The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days when they lowered my husband's coffin into the soaked red earth of Mount Hope Cemetery. The preacher's voice was trembling through the static of his microphone, and every word, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, echoed like a hammer on my ribs. My name is Gloria Whitfield. I'm 68 years old, and on that gray March morning, I believed my life had finally ended with Thomas, my husband of 44 years. The wind tugged at the black scarf tied under my chin, and the smell of wet lilies clung to the air like grief itself. My hands were numb, not from the cold, but from disbelief. The man in that coffin had been my heartbeat, my partner, my reason to keep going through every storm life threw at us. And yet, as the pastor spoke about peace and eternal rest, my phone tucked inside my purse vibrated softly, a pulse of life inside all that death. At first, I ignored it. Who would call during a funeral? The church bell tolled once heavy and final, and then again. But when the vibration came a second time, longer, more insistent, I glanced down the habit of a woman who has always kept her world in order. The screen glowed through the leather, showing an unknown number. For reasons I still can't explain, I answered. Gloria. The voice was hoarse, cracked like dry wood, but familiar. I froze. My breath hitched. The pastor's words faded, replaced by the hiss of static. Thomas. A low cough came through the speaker, followed by a strained whisper that sent ice straight through my veins. Don't cry. I'm not in that coffin. For a second, I thought I was losing my mind. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. Around me, the mourners bowed their heads in silence, unaware that my world had just cracked open. What did you say? I whispered, turning slightly away, shielding the phone under my black gloves. I can't talk long, the voice rasped. They're watching. Trust no one, especially not Malcolm. The name of my eldest son hit harder than the thunder rolling above the cemetery. Thomas. Where are you? I whispered. Are you alive? Please tell me where. The line went dead. The sound was so abrupt, so absolute that it felt like the earth itself had swallowed the voice whole. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. All I could hear was the hollow thud of wet dirt hitting the casket. One handful, then another. My younger son, Andre, put a hand on my shoulder. Mama, you okay? He asked softly. I looked up at him, his brown eyes full of concern. For a moment, I almost believed his worry was real. Almost. I'm fine, I said, forcing a trembling smile. Just cold. But I wasn't cold. I was burning from the inside, shaking with something between hope and horror. Could that have really been Thomas? The man I had kissed goodbye in a hospital bed 2 weeks earlier, whose heart monitor had gone flat while I held his hand, the man whose body I had identified myself. No, impossible, and yet, that voice. I turned to where Malcolm, my eldest, stood near the pastor, his arm draped protectively around his wife. Desiree, his expression, the perfect mask of grief. But something about the way he glanced at me, a flicker of tension behind his practiced sadness, made the words from the call echo louder. Don't trust Malcolm. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The rain grew heavier, drumming on umbrellas, washing down the faces of the tombstones. I looked at the coffin one last time and whispered so quietly no one could hear. Thomas, if you're alive, I'll find you. As the casket disappeared beneath the muddy soil, lightning split the sky. Somewhere deep in my chest, grief cracked open and suspicion took its place. The house felt like a ghost that refused to leave. Every corner held Thomas's scent, cedar soap tobacco, and that faint trace of machine oil that lingered on his shirts from years working at the docks. For 44 years, we had built a life inside these cracked walls, and now it sounded hollow like a church after the congregation's gone home. On the third night after the funeral, I sat at our kitchen table staring at his old phone charger still plugged into the wall. My hands shook as I replayed that voice over and over in my mind. I had heard it. I wasn't crazy, but doubt crept in like fog. What if grief was playing tricks? What if my brain, desperate for a reason to keep living, had invented his voice? I'd read about that before, how widows sometimes hallucinated after losing their spouses. Yet no hallucination could mimic the rasp in his tone, the way he used to draw out my name when he was worried. Then there was that warning, don't trust Malcolm. Malcolm had been cold for months before his father's death, impatient, distracted. When Thomas was hospitalized with what they called heart complications, it was Malcolm who insisted on handling the bills, the paperwork, the insurance. "You rest, Mama," he'd said, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. Dad wanted me to take care of everything. I had let him, foolishly. Now every piece of that trust felt poisoned. The next morning, I found myself at the small church across from our street, the one where Thomas used to fix the organ for free. Pastor Clay greeted me with his usual warm smile. "Sister Gloria, how are you holding up?" "Trying," I said, forcing a nod. "Pastor, I need to ask, was there any unusual request from Malcolm or anyone about Thomas's funeral?" He blinked, clearly taken aback. "No, not that I recall. Malcolm did handle the arrangements, said he wanted to spare you the stress." That phrase again, spare me, protect me, keep me quiet. When I got home, I went straight to Thomas's study, the small room at the back of the house that always smelled of old paper and varnish. He kept everything labeled neatly taxes, insurance, mechanic invoices. I pulled open the drawer marked life insurance and froze. The top sheet was a policy renewal dated just 3 weeks before he died. The coverage had increased from $25,000 to $250,000, and the new primary beneficiary wasn't me. It was Malcolm Whitfield. The room started spinning. I clutched the edge of the desk to stay upright. That voice on the phone hadn't been a delusion. It had been a warning. I dug deeper, pulling out more papers. Hospital forms. Doctor's notes. But something was missing: the discharge summary from the day Thomas supposedly came home. The hospital had said he'd passed that night, but where was the official report? Why wasn't it filed here like everything else? That evening, I called my friend Eunice Harper, a retired detective who'd worked for the Charleston Police Department for 30 years. She was the one person I could still trust. "Gloria," she said, her voice calm but sharp, "start from the beginning. Every detail." I told her everything: the phone call, the warning, the insurance, Malcolm's behavior. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "You still got the call log?" "Yes." "Send me a screenshot. I can trace that number." I did as she asked. 20 minutes later, she called back, her tone different, heavier. "Gloria, that number's registered to a prepaid phone bought in Savannah. Guess who purchased it?" My breath caught. "Who?" "Thomas Whitfield, 2 weeks before his death." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. My throat went dry. "So he's alive," I whispered. Eunice exhaled. "Either that or someone's using his phone to play mind games. But given what you've told me, especially about that policy, I'd say you're not crazy. You're in danger." That night, I locked every door and window. The crickets outside were deafening their rhythm like 1,000 tiny warnings. When I finally lay in bed, I could almost hear Thomas's voice again. "I'm not in that coffin." And for the first time since the funeral, I whispered back into the dark. "Then where are you, baby? Where did they take you?" By dawn, my hands still trembled as I clutched a mug of lukewarm coffee that had long gone bitter. Sleep had never come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that coffin sealed and heavy, and wondered who or what was actually inside it. When the first streak of sunlight slid through the blinds, I decided to stop wondering and start proving. Eunice called just after 7. "Gloria," she said briskly, "I checked hospital records this morning. Something's off. The attending physician on Thomas's death certificate, Dr. Arlen Reeves, doesn't exist in the South Carolina Medical Registry." My heart lurched. "What do you mean, doesn't exist?" "I mean, the license number listed belongs to a pediatrician who retired 10 years ago in Georgia. Whoever signed your husband's death certificate wasn't a real doctor." The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. The sound was sharp enough to make me flinch. "So you're saying someone forged his papers?" "I'm saying someone staged his death," Eunice replied quietly. "And I'd bet my pension your son's involved." That sentence sat in the air like a storm cloud. By 8, I was in my car driving to Mercy General Hospital, the place where they said Thomas had taken his last breath. The automatic doors hissed open as I walked in, the antiseptic smell clawing at my throat. The nurse at the front desk, a young woman with braids and soft eyes, gave me a polite smile. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "I need the medical file for my husband Thomas Whitfield," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He passed away 2 weeks ago." She typed quickly, then frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no record of that name in our recent death files." "That's impossible," I whispered. "I was here. I saw his body." The nurse hesitated, then leaned closer. Ma'am, we do have a record of a Thomas Whitfield admitted that week, but it says he was transferred, not deceased. Transferred where? Her voice dropped lower. It just says private care facility code P17. No location, no contact listed. My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the counter for support. Can you print that for me? I could lose my job, she said, glancing around nervously. But if what you're saying is true, if something's wrong, then you deserve to know. She printed the file and slid it discreetly across the counter. Be careful, ma'am. Whatever this is, it looks deliberate. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain again. I sat in my car staring at the paper. At the bottom of the form was a signature M. Whitfield next to the line authorizing the transfer. My own son had signed to move his father's body. I called Eunice immediately. Found something, I said breathlessly. There was no death record. Thomas was transferred, and Malcolm signed it. Eunice swore under her breath. Okay, don't confront him yet. Give me 24 hours. I'll pull property records, bank statements, see if Malcolm's got any new money flowing his way. If Thomas is alive, we'll find where they took him. When I got home, Andre was already there, sitting on my porch steps with his elbows on his knees. Mama, he said softly, you didn't answer my calls. Malcolm's been worried sick. I looked at him carefully. Andre had always been the gentler one, the one with his daddy's patience. But now his eyes darted, his voice tight. Worried about what, Andre, that I might start asking the wrong questions. His head jerked up. What are you talking about? Why don't you tell me what really happened to your father? He stood abruptly, the wood creaking under his boots. Mama, you're tired. You've been through a lot. Maybe you should rest. There it was again, the same rehearsed line everyone kept feeding me. Rest. Don't ask. Be quiet. I'm not tired, I said coldly. I'm awake for the first time in my life. As he left, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street windows, tinted engine idling. When Andre got in, the driver glanced my way, a silhouette in a dark hat. My pulse quickened. That night I called Eunice again. They're watching me, I whispered. I figured they would, she said. But don't worry. Tomorrow morning we go after the money. That's always where the truth hides. I hung up and stared into the darkness of my living room. The clock ticked once. Somewhere outside, the SUV engine roared to life again, and I finally understood the call at the funeral hadn't been a miracle. It had been a warning from a man fighting to stay alive. The next morning, I dressed the way Thomas always liked me to when I meant business. Navy skirt suit, low heels, hair pinned neat. Not for vanity, but armor. If my son thought he could bury his father and his mother's mind at the same time, he was about to learn how wrong he was. Eunice met me outside Carolina First Bank, her trench coat flapping in the humid wind. She was 65, but moved like she was still on the force, sharp eyes scanning the parking lot before we went in. I got a friend inside who owes me a favor, she whispered. Stay quiet and let me do the talking. The bank's air conditioning hit like a slap after the muggy air. At the back desk sat Mr. Harris, the same manager who'd known Thomas since his dock days. His smile faltered when he saw Eunice's badge and me beside her. Ladies, he said slowly, what can I do for you today? Eunice leaned on the counter. We're looking into irregular transactions tied to Thomas Whitfield's account. He hesitated. I don't think I'm authorized. You are now, Eunice interrupted, flipping open her retired ID. This isn't official, but it can get official if you want the state to ask why your staff allowed a fake death certificate to close an active account. That did it. He paled, typed quickly, and printed a stack of papers. 3 major withdrawals in the past month, he muttered. All cash, all signed by your son Malcolm. Here, look. The signature was neat, confident, and cruelly familiar. Each withdrawal preceded a deposit into a new account, offshore routing numbers, Harris continued. I'd guess he's laundering funds, but that's between you and your family, Mrs. Whitfield. Not anymore, I said quietly. It's between me and the law. We left with copies of every document. Outside, the sky was bruised with storm clouds. Eunice's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Gloria, we've got movement. I had a tech friend trace that transfer code from the hospital. It leads to a private medical compound in Beaufort County registered under a shell company owned by your son's real estate firm. My knees nearly gave out, so Thomas, he's there. If he's alive, that's where they're keeping him. The wind picked up, scattering the papers from my hands. Eunice helped me gather them, her jaw tight. We'll go tonight. Too risky in daylight. By the time we reached the outskirts of Beaufort, the rain had started again. The GPS led us down a dirt road lined with cypress trees until headlights cut through the dark, a gatehouse with 2 guards and a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The sign read Whitfield Care Properties, Inc. Authorized personnel only. I didn't raise my children to build prisons, I whispered. Eunice parked behind the tree line and killed the engine. We'll need to be smart. You distract them. I'll sneak around back and see what they're hiding. My heart hammered. Eunice, they might! They won't hurt you. Not with people watching. I stepped out into the rain, clutching my purse tight. The guard looked me over, bored and suspicious. Ma'am, this is private property. I'm here to see my husband, I said firmly. Thomas Whitfield. I was told he's under care here. He exchanged a quick glance with the other man. No patience by that name. I have paperwork. I lied, pulling the hospital transfer form from my bag. It says P17. You'll find him listed. As he reached for it, I noticed a light flicker on in one of the distant windows. A silhouette moved past a tall, thin man with a limp. My throat constricted. The guard shoved the paper back. You need to leave now, ma'am. But I'd already seen what I needed. That walk, that tilt of the head, it was Thomas. Eunice, I whispered into the small mic she'd clipped to my collar. He's here. A rustle came through the line. Copy that, she said. Keep them talking. Suddenly, a voice barked from behind the gate. What's going on out there? Malcolm. He stepped into the light umbrella in hand, face expressionless. For a heartbeat, the world went silent except for the rain. Mother, he said smoothly, like nothing was wrong. You shouldn't be here. The calm in his voice chilled me more than the thunder ever could. Then you'd better explain, I said, stepping closer to the fence. Because if you've buried an empty coffin and locked your father behind these gates, you'll wish you hadn't called me mother. His smile didn't reach his eyes. You should have stayed asleep, Mama. And before I could answer, 2 guards stepped forward, their hands moving to their belts. Rain pelted my face as the guards closed in heavy boots, splashing through puddles. Malcolm's voice was steady, almost kind, the way a snake might sound before it strikes. Mama, you're confused. You're letting your grief twist your mind. His calmness was worse than shouting. He wasn't angry. He was certain of control. Let's go home. He continued, reaching through the gate like he could take my hand and erase everything. We can talk about this inside where it's warm. Where's your father? I demanded. Don't lie to me, Malcolm. I saw him in that window. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes, a twitch, a flash of fear, and I knew. I said, I raised my voice over the thunder. Where is Thomas Whitfield? The taller guard stepped between us. That's enough, ma'am. Step away. Don't touch her. Malcolm snapped his mask, slipping for half a second. He didn't want witnesses. From the corner of my vision, I caught movement in the tree line, a faint signal from Eunice. She'd gotten inside. I just had to buy her time. Fine, I said, forcing a smile. If you won't tell me, maybe Pastor Clay will. He was the one who signed off on your father's funeral expenses, wasn't he? That name hit him like a stone. He froze. His jaw tightened, his umbrella tipping slightly in the wind. You leave the church out of this, he hissed. So you're not only hiding him, you're laundering through God's house now. Malcolm's face hardened. Enough. He turned to the guards. Escort my mother to her car. Make sure she gets home safe. But his tone, the edge in it, made safe sound like a threat. I stumbled backward as one guard reached for my arm, but before he could grab me, a crack split the night, a flash from behind the building. The floodlights flickered, alarms blaring. The guards turned instinctively toward the sound. Eunice's voice came through my earpiece, breathless. I found him, Gloria. He's here. He's weak, but alive. The world tilted. Get him out, I whispered. Please, Eunice, get him out. I'm trying, but they're locking the exits. You need to distract them another 30 seconds. So I did the only thing a desperate mother could. I screamed. You buried an empty coffin, Malcolm. I shouted, my voice echoing through the rain. You murdered your father in every way that counts. You lied to me, to God, to this whole town. The guards froze. Malcolm turned white. Shut up, he barked, slamming the umbrella into the fence. You don't understand what's at stake. Oh, I understand, I said, stepping closer, letting the rain drip down my face. You sold your father for insurance money, and when that wasn't enough, you tried to sell your soul too. The alarms grew louder. Red lights flashed across the compound, then gunfire. One shot, then another. I dropped instinctively to the ground, mud splashing up my arms. Eunice, I yelled into the mic, but the static drowned her out. The gates jerked open as a black SUV burst through tires, spitting gravel. For one sickening moment, I thought Malcolm had sent for backup until I saw Eunice behind the wheel and slumped beside her in the passenger seat Thomas. "Get in!" she shouted. I scrambled up, my heart racing so fast I could barely breathe. The guards ran after us, yelling. Malcolm's voice cut through the chaos, furious, panicked. "Stop them!" Eunice slammed the gas. The SUV fishtailed across the mud bullets, pinging against the metal. We tore down the road, the compound shrinking in the rearview mirror until it vanished behind the trees. Inside, Thomas's breathing was shallow. His face was gaunt, his skin gray. He turned his head weakly toward me. "Gloria," he whispered, his voice fragile but unmistakably his. "You found me." Tears blurred my vision. I took his hand, cold and trembling. "I heard you, Thomas. I heard you at the funeral." Eunice's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We've got about 20 minutes before they call the cops. They'll spin this fast. We need to get somewhere safe." I glanced back. Headlights appeared in the distance, Malcolm's car. "He's not letting go," I said. "Then neither are we," Eunice replied. The road stretched ahead like a river of darkness, and behind us, my son's headlights burned like the eyes of the devil himself. We drove through the night, every bend in the road lit by flashes of lightning that made the trees look like ghosts reaching out to drag us back. I kept one hand on Thomas's chest, feeling the shallow rhythm of his breath. He was alive. Barely, but alive. The rain on the windshield blurred the world into streaks of gray, and the hum of the tires was the only thing steady enough to keep me from falling apart. Eunice didn't speak until we pulled into a dirt driveway behind an old fishing cabin by the marsh. The sign had faded years ago, but she'd kept the place since her detective days a forgotten safe house. "Nobody knows this spot," she said, killing the headlights. "We'll hole up till sunrise." I helped Thomas inside, his body limp against mine. He weighed almost nothing. His beard was overgrown, his clothes thin and stained, and when I turned on the single lamp, I gasped. His wrists were raw, bruised by restraints. "Oh, Thomas," I whispered, pressing my hand to his cheek. His skin was clammy cold as river water. He tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Eunice poured a glass of water and held it to his lips. He took a sip, then coughed hard like his lungs had forgotten how to breathe freely. "I told you," he rasped. "I told you not to trust him." "Don't try to talk," I said, though my own voice shook. "Just rest." But Thomas gripped my wrist, eyes wide, urgent. "You have to know what they did." Eunice crouched beside him, recording on her phone. "It's okay, Mr. Whitfield. Tell us everything. We need it on record." He nodded weakly. "Malcolm and Desiree. They came to me a month before. Said they'd found investors for my dock business. They wanted to expand, open a new shipping line. I thought they were helping." His eyes clouded with pain. But it wasn't investors. It was a front. Pastor Clay introduced them to some men who were laundering money through fake church donations. They used my business account. When the feds started sniffing around, Malcolm panicked. Eunice's brow furrowed. "So he faked your death to wipe the trail." Thomas nodded. "They said it would just be temporary. That I'd disappear until things cooled down. But once I signed the transfer papers, they drugged me. Woke up in that facility. Locked. No phone, no sunlight. They told me you knew Gloria, that you agreed." My stomach dropped. "They told you what?" "That you didn't want to see me anymore. That you said I'd ruined our family with debt." His voice cracked. "I thought you hated me." I covered my mouth as tears flooded my eyes. "Thomas, no. They lied. I would have died before I turned on you." He looked away, shame and relief battling on his face. "I knew it couldn't be true when I saw the papers. They changed the insurance to Malcolm's name. I left a message for you called during the funeral. I stole a guard's phone." Eunice exhaled slowly. "That's why the line went dead. They must have traced it." Thomas coughed again, the sound deep and ragged. "There's more. There's a ledger proof of every fake transaction. It's hidden under the floorboards of the dock office. That's what Malcolm's really after. If he finds it, he can buy his way out of anything." I pressed my forehead to his hand. "Then we'll find it first." Eunice stood. "We'll go at first light. I'll call my old contact at the bureau quietly. If we can get that ledger, we'll have enough to bury your son legally this time." Thomas's eyes fluttered shut, exhaustion pulling him under. I sat beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Outside, the marsh hummed with crickets and the slow groan of thunder moving out to sea. Eunice poured herself coffee and leaned against the doorframe. "You know he'll come after you now, right? Malcolm's not the type to quit." I know I said starings at the man I'd thought I'd buried, but I've already lost one husband and one son to greed. I'm not losing both again. When I finally closed my eyes, it wasn't sleep that came, it was resolve. By sunrise, Thomas was still asleep, his breathing steady but shallow. The marsh mist rolled in from the water coating the windows in dew, and the air carried the smell of salt and pine. Eunice was already dressed, checking her pistol calm as a surgeon before an operation. "You sure about this?" she asked, glancing at me. "We find that ledger, we end this." "I'm sure," I said quietly, tucking the cross Thomas had given me years ago into my coat pocket. "For him. For the truth." We left Thomas with a locked door and a note that said simply, "Hold on." The drive back to Charleston was silent tension thick enough to taste. When we reached the docks, the sky had cleared to a pale, deceptive blue. Thomas's old office sat on the edge of the harbor, a small wooden structure with peeling paint and warped boards that had seen too many summers. I could still picture him standing out front with a wrench in one hand, calling to the boys on the boats. For a moment, grief hit like a wave, but I forced it down. Eunice pushed the door open. It creaked the hinges, whining. Inside, dust motes swirled in the beams of light. The smell of oil and salt water was still there, mixed with something faintly rotten neglect. "Where did he say?" she asked. "Under the floorboards," I said, pointing toward the desk. He kept his ledgers close to the window for light. We knelt, prying up the boards one by one. My fingers ached, nails splitting, until finally under the third plank I felt something cold metal, a small lockbox rusted and heavy. "Got it," I whispered. Eunice grinned grimly. "Let's see what's worth dying for." Inside were pages of handwritten notes, numbers, wire codes, and names, hundreds of them. At the top of one page, the heading read, "Whitfield Charitable Trust, Deposit Summary." The listed donors included men I recognized, from church business leaders, even a local councilman. Eunice scanned fast, her eyes narrowing. "This is a money laundering map, shell accounts offshores, tax evasion. Every donation to that trust was fake." And then, near the bottom of one page, my heart stopped. My own signature. "Eunice," I said, voice cracking. "They forged my name." The page showed a transfer of $50,000 from Gloria Whitfield beneficiary to Whitfield Care Properties Inc., the same name on the facility gate. It made it look like I had funded the very prison my husband had been trapped in. "They were setting you up," Eunice said quietly. "If this went public, you'd look like an accomplice." No wonder they needed you to stay quiet. Before I could respond, the floorboards groaned above us. Eunice froze. "Someone's here." We ducked behind the desk as footsteps creaked across the hallway. A man's voice called out, "Mama, you here?" "Malcolm." He stepped into the doorway, his shadow long in the morning light. The smirk on his face sent cold straight through me. "I knew you couldn't leave well enough alone." Eunice raised her gun slightly hidden behind the desk. "Don't move," she said evenly. Malcolm's smile did not falter. "Detective Harper, I heard you were good at sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." "You've got 5 seconds to leave before I make this official," she said. He laughed softly. "Official? You think you can touch me? You've got a forged ledger and a tired old woman's word. Meanwhile, I've got lawyers, investors, judges who owe me favors." I stood slowly, the lockbox clutched to my chest. "You forgot one thing, Malcolm," I said, my voice shaking but steady enough to carry. "You've also got your father's voice, and it's about to speak." He blinked. "What?" "Thomas is alive," I said. The color drained from his face. "That's impossible." Eunice stepped forward, her phone raised to the red recording light, glowing. "Say that again," she said. He stared at her realization dawning too late. "You!" But the sound of police sirens cut through the air, distant but closing fast. Eunice smirked. "You're done, boy." Malcolm bolted. The back door slammed. We ran after him, the lockbox heavy in my arms. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the docks. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to hope. Not the gentle kind, but the fierce kind that comes right before the storm breaks. The docks were alive with chaos, sirens, blaring radios, crackling the wind, carrying the salt of the harbor and the sweat of fear. I ran after Malcolm, clutching the lockbox against my chest. My legs screamed, but I didn't care. He sprinted toward the pier, his coat flapping, trying to reach a black sedan waiting at the end. "Malcolm," I shouted, "you don't have to do this." He didn't look back. He just yelled over his shoulder, "You ruined everything." Eunice caught up beside me, breath sharp but controlled. "Keep him in sight," she barked, pulling her service weapon again. The police cars screeched to a stop at the entrance, blue lights cutting through the morning haze. Malcolm made it to the end of the dock, turned, and for a second his face was a mix of rage and panic. "You never believed in me," he spat, voice echoing over the water. "You gave everything to Andre the Dreamer, the useless artist, and left me cleaning up your mess." "Cleaning it up," I said, gasping. "You stole from your father, forged his death, trapped him like an animal. That's not cleaning up, that's destroying everything he built." He sneered. "He was a weak man, Mama. You both were. Always talking about faith and community while the world got richer without us. I just wanted what was owed." "Owed?" My voice cracked. "What's owed isn't taken, Malcolm. It's earned." He laughed a hollow, brittle sound. "You'll never understand power." Behind him, 2 officers moved in silently, guns drawn. Eunice raised a hand to signal them to wait. "Malcolm," she said, voice low, steady, commanding. "This is your one chance to stop running. Your father's alive. You can face this now, or you can drown in it." For a moment, he faltered. His eyes darted between me, the officers, the open water. I saw my son, the little boy who used to hand me wildflowers, not the man who'd buried me in lies. Then he lunged. He shoved a crate toward us, splinters flying, and bolted for the boat. One of the officers shouted, "Stop, police!" 2 shots cracked through the air, warning rounds whistling over the waves. Malcolm stumbled, losing his footing on the slick boards. The lockbox in my arms slipped, hit the ground, and burst open. Papers fluttered like startled birds into the wind. I fell to my knees, grabbing at the documents. One sheet landed near Malcolm's feet, the ledger page with his name, his signature. He looked down at it, then up at me, realization flashing across his face. "It's over," I said softly. The officers closed in. He raised his hands, but not in surrender and despair. His voice was barely a whisper. "You think this changes anything, Mama? People like me don't go to prison. They build them." Then he smiled a hollow, broken thing and stepped back toward the edge of the dock. "Malcolm!" I screamed. The wood cracked beneath him. For a second, he hovered between 2 worlds, the son I raised and the stranger he'd become, and then the boards gave way. He fell into the water with a splash that silenced everything. The officers rushed forward, but Eunice grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said quietly. "The current's too strong." The tide swallowed the ripples. There was no sign of him, just the echo of sirens and the paper trail he'd left behind. I collapsed against a piling, clutching one of the soaked pages. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," I whispered. Eunice crouched beside me. Sometimes justice doesn't wait for the courtroom. An hour later, divers recovered the car at the end of the pier, its doors open, keys still in the ignition. No body, just Malcolm's jacket tangled in the nets. By noon, the bureau had arrived. They took the ledger, the recordings, and Thomas's statement via video call from the safe house. Charges were filed: insurance fraud, kidnapping, money laundering, conspiracy. Desiree was arrested that afternoon trying to withdraw money from the trust account. As the agents packed up the evidence, Eunice put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Gloria." But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. The wind shifted off of the harbor, carrying the faint smell of diesel and rain. I looked at the horizon and thought of Thomas still weak but alive, and of Malcolm somewhere beneath those gray waves, a man undone by the very greed he thought would save him. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't cry. I just whispered into the wind, "Rest, son. The storm's over now." 2 months later, the courthouse in Charleston smelled like polished wood and disinfectant, like justice trying too hard to be clean. Thomas sat beside me in his wheelchair, thinner, but stronger now, his hands steady on the armrests. The press had filled the halls. The Whitfield family scandal had become a spectacle. People wanted to see how a respected pastor's son turned a church into a criminal empire. Desiree entered first, escorted by 2 deputies. Her once perfect hair hung limp around her face. When her eyes met mine, they flickered with something, shame maybe, or the bitter recognition that her charm couldn't save her now. The judge adjusted his glasses. Case of the state versus Desiree Whitfield, charged with insurance fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. Eunice sat behind the prosecution table, no longer a detective, but still the sharpest person in the room. The bureau had honored her work, and she'd insisted on sitting in as a witness. When the clerk called my name, I rose slowly and took the stand. My legs trembled, but my voice didn't. Mrs. Whitfield, the prosecutor began. Could you tell the court what happened the day of your husband's funeral? The memory hit like cold water. I received a phone call, I said. It was my husband's voice. He told me not to cry. He told me he wasn't in that coffin. A murmur swept the room. The prosecutor nodded. And what did you do then? I listened, I said simply. For the first time in a long time, I listened to the voice that had never lied to me. The defense lawyer objected speculative, but the judge waved him off. Proceed. I told them everything: the forged papers, the call logs, the hospital transfer, the night at the facility. I showed the photos Eunice had taken Thomas in that cell, the bruises on his wrists. Every word seemed to scrape my throat raw, but I kept going. When the prosecutor asked who had orchestrated the scheme, I said the name that still burned. My son, Malcolm Whitfield. A gasp rippled through the room. Desiree looked down, her eyes wet her facade, cracking at last. He said it would be temporary, she whispered under her breath, voice trembling. He said he'd bring him back. The judge turned to her. Mrs. Whitfield, would you like to testify? She nodded weakly. Malcolm planned everything. He said Thomas had to disappear before the government found the accounts. He promised no one would get hurt. Her hands shook as she spoke. But when Thomas started fighting back, Malcolm said he'd make it permanent. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the reporters stopped typing. Thomas wheeled forward slightly. Your Honor, he said, his voice thin but clear. I forgive them. The judge looked at him surprised. You forgive the people who imprisoned you? Thomas nodded. Yes, but forgiveness doesn't mean freedom. It means I won't carry their sin any longer. That's for the law to do. When the verdict came, it landed like thunder. Desiree guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 8 years with the possibility of parole after 5. As the deputies led her away, she looked back at me one last time. He's not dead, she said softly. Malcolm. I saw him that night. He made it out. A chill ran through me. The prosecutor tried to dismiss it as desperation, but deep down, I knew she wasn't lying. Outside the courthouse, the crowd pressed forward, cameras flashing. One reporter shouted, Mrs. Whitfield, how does it feel to get justice? I looked at the sky, blue and wide, over Charleston's rooftops. Justice doesn't feel like victory, I said quietly. It feels like peace trying to find its way home. Thomas reached for my hand. His palm was warm, solid. We're free now, Gloria, he said. But as we walked down those courthouse steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that freedom had a shadow, and somewhere out there my son was still running beneath it. Summer came to Charleston wrapped in heat and silence. The courthouse buzz faded, reporters moved on, and our house, once a crime scene of grief, became strangely calm. Thomas spent his mornings on the porch, Bible open on his lap, the rhythm of waves rolling through the marsh. I played piano again softly, the same hymn he used to hum, while sanding pews at the church. His eye is on the sparrow. But peace never came easy. Every creak of the floorboards at night, every shadow outside the window made me listen for footsteps. There were no sightings of Malcolm, no confirmed death. The police said the current was too strong to recover anything. The bureau filed him as missing, presumed dead. I never believed it. One evening, Eunice stopped by. She looked tired, older, her badge finally hung up for good. You should rest, she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. The bureau closed the case. Desiree took a plea deal. She'll be out in a few years. I nodded, and Malcolm. She hesitated, eyes lowering to her coffee. Interpol flagged movement in one of his shell accounts last week. Small withdrawal offshore. Could be a glitch, could be him. I laughed softly, a dry, bitter sound. He always did think he was smarter than the tide. Thomas wheeled in quietly, his face calm. If he's alive, Gloria, God will deal with him. It's not our burden anymore. But it was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went out to the porch, the air heavy with magnolia and salt. The moon shimmered on the water, and for a moment I thought I saw movement near the dock, just a shape, faint, human. My heart thudded. Malcolm, I whispered into the dark. Nothing. Just the wind brushing through reeds. Then a sound, a single knock at the door. I turned slowly. The porch light flickered once, twice. My hand trembled as I opened it. A small box sat on the step wrapped in brown paper. No note. I carried it inside, setting it on the table beside Thomas's sleeping chair. Inside was a photograph our family taken 15 years ago at the church picnic. Thomas laughing me holding the pie, Malcolm with his arm around Andre, and written across the back in Malcolm's handwriting, "Forgive me, Mama. It's over." I sat there for a long time staring at that looping script. Was it a confession or a goodbye? Eunice came the next morning, saw the photo, and went pale. "Where'd you get this?" "Front porch, last night." She turned the photo over, tracing the ink. "That handwriting's fresh. It wasn't sitting long." "Then he was here," I said. "Or someone wants you to think he was." We checked the porch, the yard, the dock, nothing. No footprints, no tire marks. Just the marsh swallowing secrets. Weeks passed. The world kept spinning. The church reopened under new leadership, the scandal slowly fading into gossip and prayer. People whispered when they saw me at the grocery store, but their stares softened with time. I'd become the widow who survived the impossible again. One morning, Thomas asked me to drive him to the docks. "I need to see the water," he said. The air was warm, the gulls crying above us. We sat in silence, looking out where the tide curled over itself. "Do you think he's gone?" I asked quietly. Thomas didn't answer right away. He just smiled, weary but sure. "I think some storms end only when we stop standing in the rain." I looked at his hands, scarred strong, still trembling slightly, and realized he was right. Malcolm's shadow would always linger, but I didn't have to live under it. That night, I packed the photograph in a drawer and shut it tight. I lit a candle, played the hymn again, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt like home, learning how to breathe again. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the water, distant, no longer threatening. Autumn crept in soft and golden, the way peace sometimes does when you stop chasing it. The marsh turned copper under the sun, and the air smelled of pine and distant rain. The world had moved on from our tragedy, and for once I was grateful for people's short memories. Thomas's health improved little by little. He could walk short distances with a cane now, and every morning he insisted on watering the roses himself. "They still bloom," he'd say, smiling no matter how bad the storm. I knew he was talking about more than flowers. I reopened the church's old music room that winter. The piano had sat untouched since before everything happened. Keys, yellowed strings out of tune. I cleaned it carefully, oiling the hinges, replacing what was broken. And one Sunday after service, a group of neighborhood children gathered outside the door, peeking in while I played. They looked half scared, half curious, like they were entering a place where ghosts still lived. "Come in," I said gently. Music doesn't bite. The oldest girl, no more than 10, stepped forward. "Mama says you used to teach," she whispered. "I still do," I replied, handing her a sheet of beginner's notes. "If you've got patience and a good ear, I'll show you how to make a hymn sing." That's how it began, 5 kids at first, then 10, until the sound of laughter filled those dusty halls again. We called it the Sparrow Choir after Thomas's favorite song. He sat by the door most days, nodding along as their tiny fingers learned the melody. See, he'd tell me after class, even broken things can make harmony. Sometimes, when the sunlight caught his face just right, I'd almost forget the years of pain between us. We'd talk about simple things, new recipes, the neighbor's dog Andre's art gallery up in Atlanta. He'd call twice a week, promising to visit soon. But not every shadow had faded. Some nights I'd wake up and hear the dock creaking like footsteps pacing. Once I swore I saw a figure near the waterline just beyond the reach of the lamp. Tall, still, watching. I'd blink and it'd be gone. I never told Thomas. He needed peace more than I needed answers. One afternoon, as I was stacking hymn books, Eunice stopped by, bringing a pie and her familiar, cautious smile. She'd left police work for good, bought a small boat, and started fishing. "Keeps me out of trouble," she joked. We sat on the porch with coffee, watching the light fade. "You ever think about him?" she asked quietly. "Every day," I admitted. But not with hate. Just sadness. "He wasn't born evil, Eunice. He got lost." She nodded slowly. "Maybe. But people like Malcolm, when they disappear, it's rarely for good." I looked at the horizon where the water met the sky. If he's out there, I hope he finds peace before it finds him. We didn't talk about it again. The following spring, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a clipping from a local paper in the Bahamas: "Unknown American found dead, near shore, foul play, suspected." The man had no ID, no passport, but the description, height, age, the small scar over his right brow fit too perfectly to ignore. I folded the article, said nothing to Thomas, and slipped it into my Bible between Psalms and Proverbs. That night, I lit a candle for both of my sons, one who lived by faith and one who died by greed. Life didn't go back to normal, it simply became quieter. Some evenings I'd walk the dock alone, the wood groaning under my weight, the wind warm against my face. I'd think about all we'd survived and wonder how many versions of me had been buried and reborn along the way. When I finally looked up at the stars, I whispered the same words Thomas used to say when he tucked our boys in as children: sleep in peace. Tomorrow's got enough noise of its own. The years after everything had a rhythm slower, quieter, shaped by the sound of waves against wood and the laughter of children learning to play out of tune. I was 72 when the church finally rebuilt its community center. They asked me to speak at the reopening to share something about resilience. I said yes, though my hands trembled holding the paper. When I stepped up to the pulpit that day, the room was full. Neighbors, students, parents, faces from every season of my life. The light from the stained glass spilled across the pews, the same light that once fell on Thomas's sermons, and I felt his presence sitting there among them. He'd been gone 2 years now, a quiet heart failure that took him in his sleep. I'd found him with the Bible open to the same passage he read at every funeral, Psalm 91. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. I cleared my throat and began. I once thought faith meant trusting that life would be fair. But life doesn't deal in fairness, it deals in endurance. The real miracle is waking up after the fire with enough breath left to start again. There was no pity in the room, only silence, the kind that listens. Afterward, as the children from the Sparrow Choir played their halting notes on the piano, I walked to the back of the churchyard where the new memorial garden stood. A simple plaque read, "For those lost and found again." Beneath it were Thomas's ashes mingled with roses. Eunice joined me there, leaning on her cane. "You did it," she said softly. "You turned all that hurt into something that sings." I smiled faintly. I didn't do it alone. The world gave me ashes. You helped me make soil. She chuckled. "You always did have a way with words, Gloria." We watched the children through the window, their fingers stumbling but brave. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat by the piano, the church empty except for the echoes of their music. On the bench beside me lay the old photograph, the same one that had arrived in that brown paper box years ago. I'd kept it edges frayed, now the ink fading, but the faces still clear. I ran my fingers over Malcolm's smile. "Forgive me, Mama, it's over." I still didn't know whether he'd written those words out of remorse or fear. Maybe both. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. I lit a candle and whispered, "I forgive you." The words didn't erase what he'd done, but they loosened the chains I'd carried for too long. Forgiveness wasn't about letting him go, it was about letting myself stay. Outside, the wind stirred the magnolia trees. I could hear Thomas's voice in my memory, that soft laugh he used when something finally made sense. "See, Gloria, even the broken branches bloom when the season's right." I smiled through tears. He was right. The next morning, I walked down to the dock. The boards were weathered, salt-eaten, but they still held. The water shimmered gold with sunrise. I sat at the edge, dangling my feet just above the tide, the way I used to with Thomas decades ago. "I think I'm finally home," I said to the horizon. A heron landed nearby, elegant and still. It looked at me for a long moment before lifting into the air, wings wide and bright against the morning light. I took that as an answer. That night before bed, I opened my notebook and wrote one last line beneath all the messy pages of my life's story. Truth is not loud, it's the quiet that comes after every storm. Then I closed the book, blew out the candle, and let the darkness rest easy around me.